Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. As you can see by the fact that I am wearing glasses again, yes, it's story time. I will be reading a passage relating to the current standoff between Britain and Russia in just a moment. First, I wanted to point out the latest poll numbers between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Joe Biden is now down 5 points to Trump. Previously, he was only down 2 points. Now, make of that as you will. I certainly am not a fan of either one of them. But, well, make of it as you will. I'll leave it at that. It is an interesting turn of events. Even though the unemployment rate has gone down considerably in the US, Joe Biden is not being given the credit. Why that is? Well, I don't know. I suspect that it may have something to do with Gaza, and that the situation in Gaza has blinded people so much to Joe Biden's overall performance that it's in effect spilling over into things that are unrelated to, um, well, to other things, to like, for example, unemployment. Even though the unemployment rate has gone down, he's not being given credit for it, and I suspect again that it is because of Gaza. A lot of people are angry at Gaza, at the situation in Gaza, at Joe Biden's support for Gaza, militarily and financially. And so, if I had to guess, and I'm not a betting man, but if I had to guess, I would say that that is the reason for Joe Biden's shrinking poll numbers. Unfortunately, when I've read the stories about this particular poll, it does not mention that. And it's like the poll is looking at Joe Biden's performance in the economy as an isolated event. Well, in politics, nothing is isolated. Nothing. If you do poorly in one area, then people are going to, whether rightly or wrongly, blame you for other things too. And I suspect that the generalized anger against President Joe Biden for supporting Benjamin Netanyahu, or more accurately, Benjamin Netanyahu, is affecting other areas of his performance as well. So, what does that mean? That means that if the election were held today, that well, most likely Donald Trump would win. Most likely. Now, nothing is certain. Polls are not infallible. They have been wrong many times in the past. There's no guarantee that this time they will be right. But it seems to me that whereas Donald Trump has a coalition, the MAGA coalition behind him, what coalition is supporting Joseph Biden? If you know of one, please tell me. I don't know of one. I know of isolated individuals that are coming out in favor of him, supporting him, but not like what we see with Donald Trump. There is no democratic version of the MAGA movement that is supporting Joe Biden. So I am not optimistic for Joe Biden. And I'm stating that carefully. I'm not optimistic for Joe Biden. That does not mean I support Joe Biden. In fact, I do not, but I also do not support Donald Trump. So it's not a question of one or the other. To me, it's a question of both are lousy candidates. They are both suffering the signs of dementia, which obviously they can't be blamed for. My father had very severe dementia toward the end of his life, and so I know what dementia is. He was on the dementia floor of the assisted living facility that he was in, and there I got a chance to see other people with dementia as well, some who were a lot worse than my father, and some who were not as bad as my father. In fact, I would argue that some of the people on the floor were actually in better shape than either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Now, bear in mind, I am not a medical professional. I am not qualified to diagnose dementia. So what I say should be taken with a grain of salt, and I hope you will do that. Don't take what I am saying as the last word on it. I have no authority to say what I just said, but I said it nonetheless because that's my impression, or that was my impression when I was on that floor visiting my father and seeing how bad off he was. My father's dementia progressed very rapidly. It does not always progress rapidly, and so I don't know whether it will progress rapidly with Trump and Biden or one or the other, but it might. And so it could be that by January of next year, which isn't too far from now, it's only 11 months away, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, or perhaps both of them, might have severe dementia, and they might be the candidates put forward by the Democratic and Republican parties for President of the United States. So, again, nothing else to add to that, but I think it's important to say it because, to the best of my knowledge, nobody else is saying it. I wish they were. I wish I were not shouting into the darkness, but I feel like I am. This subject, people are wondering, why aren't people supporting Joe Biden? Or why aren't more people giving Joe Biden credit for the lower unemployment numbers? And again, it's clear because they're angry at Joe Biden for the war in Gaza. Okay, that is not what I plan to discuss, so I will now drop that subject and go on to the subject that I had planned to talk about, which is totally unrelated, on a completely different issue than presidential politics. It's nothing of the sort. Basically, I wanted to talk about the situation that has been, I guess you could say, unraveling very rapidly in the world as a whole. It isn't only the war in Gaza. It isn't only the war in Ukraine. It covers many other areas. For example, Britain has said that it may post nuclear weapons on its soil. That reminds me, in some ways, although it's not precise, of the Turkish-Cuban Missile Crisis back in the early 1960s, commonly misnamed the Cuban Missile Crisis because calling it that leaves out Turkey. And how convenient that is for the United States to leave out Turkey. Well, Turkey was certainly a big part of it. And the deal that was reached between Khrushchev and Kennedy not only involved Cuba, but also involved Turkey. Now, what has Russia threatened to do? Now, here's where I go into my story time thing that I had mentioned that I would do. This is an article. It's called "Russia Vows to Respond If U.S. Sends Nuclear Weapons." This is an article from Newsweek. Now, Newsweek is not my favorite publication in the world, but this article caught my eye. And so, in spite of the fact that I'm not a big fan of Newsweek, I used to be in a previous era, but not anymore. But I'll go ahead and tell you what this article says. Russia has vowed to respond should the U.S. station nuclear weapons in Britain. So nice. The warning was issued by, and I'm probably going to botch up his name, and I apologize for that, Gennady Galov, Moscow's permanent representative to the UN, on the state TV channel Russia 24, news agency RIA Novosti reported on Monday. He said Moscow was monitoring Washington's alleged plans to deploy its nuclear weapons in Britain to counter a growing threat from Russia, per the British newspaper The Telegraph, which is also widely read in the United States. We are talking perhaps about the reactivation of an airbase with American nuclear weapons in Great Britain, Galov said, or Galiev said. There is also talk about the possibility of sending nuclear weapons to the Baltic states. So smart of the U.S. to do that. Isn't that smart? Really, really bright. And to Poland. All this creates a tense situation. We are monitoring how developments are going in this direction. Of course, if this is so, and I believe it is, Russia will be forced to react to this accordingly. His remarks come days after the Telegraph reporting, citing Pentagon documents, U.S. Department of Defense documents, that the U.S. plans to place nuclear weapons some 3 times the strength of the Hiroshima bomb at a Royal Air Force station 100 kilometers or 62 miles north of London. I know that area. I've been there. It's pretty rural in that area. Not many people live in that area 62 miles north of London, if I'm thinking of the same place that they're talking about here. Newsweek has contacted the Pentagon for comment by email. The UK's Ministry of Defense said of the reports, it remains a long-standing UK and NATO policy to neither confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons at a given location. What does that mean? It means that the story is true. If the story were not true, either the US or Britain would thoroughly discount it. So the idea that it's a policy to neither confirm nor deny things, that's true sometimes. But when you're talking about something like a threat from Russia because of the placement of nukes in Britain by the US, you would expect a response from either the US or the UK, but they don't give one. So that gives you more information than you need. The news that such weapons could be deployed to the UK comes after NATO officials warned member states that the alliance may eventually have to go to war against Russia. I mean, if we didn't already have enough problems in the world, if we weren't already seeing what I have long been referring to as the great unraveling of this world, a term that I actually thought I coined until I heard somebody else use it. Well, maybe he got it from me. I don't know, but I doubt it. It's not a very complex term, and so it's understandable that more than one person would come up with it. In January, Admiral Rob Bauer, chair of the NATO Military Committee, warned that the alliance could be at war with Russia within 20 years. And many civilians would therefore be needed to mobilize to fight. To fight what? To fight a nuclear war? You cannot fight a nuclear war. You simply can't. You can only live or die, but you cannot fight a nuclear war. That is simply impossible. Simply impossible. The UK Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Patrick Sanders, called on the government, the British government, last month to mobilize the nation should a war with Russia be declared. When similar reports last fall circulated about the potential deployment of US nuclear weapons to the UK, Russia warned it would treat any such move as an escalation. Gee, I wonder why that would be. I guess because it would be an escalation. If this happens, it will be treated by us as an escalation, which will lead to the exact opposite of achieving the pressing task of removing all US nuclear weapons from Europe. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman, and again, I apologize if I mispronounce her name, Maria Zakharova, said at the time, according to state-run news agency TASS. That's the end of the story. It is a really, really frightening development that amidst all of the problems that we are seeing in the world right now, that there is now talk by Russia as a direct response to US threats of placing nukes in the UK, of a possible nuclear war between, I don't know, the US and the UK on one side, and Russia and who knows what other countries on the other. That kind of war would simply not be survivable. It would not. A nuclear war is not like a conventional war, where you have troops on the ground, mobilized, and fighting against each other, shooting at one another. That is not what a nuclear war is. I remember when I was an elementary school student, they used to show us these regular duck and cover movies. Well, it was one movie. If you're as old as I am, most likely you remember that. It was an old movie, even at the time. It was made in the 1950s. We were shown it in the 1960s. And we would actually laugh, as I recall, in class, mostly because the clothing styles looked so odd. Here we were in the 60s watching people in the 50s in 50s style clothing. So it did look kind of odd to us, but who cares? That's not the main point. The main character was a cartoon. This cartoon was a turtle. And the turtle would regularly put his head back into his shell. And the announcer would say that the turtle was being cautious, and therefore, boys and girls, as the movie said, all of you should be careful as well. But what did the movie say to do? Duck and cover. I think I got the melody approximately right. There was one point in the movie, I guess a 16mm movie when I saw it. You can find it on YouTube. Just look up Duck and Cover movie, you'll find it. Watch the longest version because the other versions are abridged. It is unintentionally humorous because the way that it talks about nuclear war is entirely unrealistic. For example, at one point in the movie, you see this young boy walk up to a man. In the distance, there is a mushroom cloud, a nuclear mushroom cloud. And this boy walks up to the man who has a big smiling face. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were a witness to a nuclear war, I know that I would have a big smiling face on too. And apparently, there's no words, but apparently asks him, "Where should I go?" His smile becomes even broader and he points in a particular direction. He tells the kid, basically, I guess, go there and you will be safe. Go ahead and minimize the browser since I don't need it anymore. And the kid smiles back to the adult and goes there. When I was a kid, we would have these regular duck and cover drills. A certain kind of alarm would go off. We would go under our desks and put our heads to our knees and cover our heads with our arms like this. And we would stay there until the alarm went off a second time. That would not protect anybody from a nuclear war. It just wouldn't. You can't protect people from a nuclear war by having them go under their desk. Stupid. We also had air raid drills, which were different. All school buildings at the time, maybe there are still some around. I imagine the majority of those school buildings don't exist anymore. But all school buildings back then, in the 60s, had air raid shelters. And they had a sign on them indicating that they were air raid shelters. A different kind of alarm would go off. And we would all be led by our teacher into the air raid shelter. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I might have just not been a complete observer. That's possible. But I remember when we went down into the air raid shelter, looking around for food and drink, and I didn't see any. There was nothing at all that I could see. Now, I'm not saying that there was no food and drink. I'm just saying that if there was any, I didn't see it. So my question is, say we got down into that air raid shelter, and say Russia, the former Soviet Union, attacked New York City, which is where I was living at the time, where I was born and raised, with a nuclear weapon. How long would we be expected to stay down there? Or maybe even a better question, how long would we be able to stay down there? No matter what number you come up with, would not be long enough. That's the reality of it. Once a nuclear weapon is dropped on a major city like New York, the nuclear power that is generated from that blast stays around. It doesn't dissipate right away. If you try to get outside of the air raid shelter and walk around on the ground, you will die of fallout. That's it. You'll be dead. Not necessarily immediately, but you'll be dead soon. And your death will not be any fun. You will die a slow death of nuclear contamination. The only thing that I can imagine, and I used to show this video to my students, and I would make the same points basically as I just made to you, was to give people, especially children, who are constantly hearing about the possibility of a nuclear war with the former Soviet Union, a sense of solace, a sense of protection, that in spite of it, in spite of any kind of nuclear catastrophe, there was a means of survival, even though there was not. No one would survive that kind of thing, in my opinion. All the things I've read have said just that. There would be zero survivors of that kind of a nuclear holocaust, especially occurring in such a large, densely populated area as New York City, which at that time, not anymore, but at that time, was the largest city in the world. I mean, now New York City is not even the largest city in North America. That distinction belongs to Mexico City. But regardless, whether it's a big city, or a small city, or medium-sized city, dropping a nuke on that city would be the end. And so, what I wonder when I think about the story from Newsweek and the kind of, I don't know, what seems to me to be a very relaxed, nonchalant way of describing it, as if, oh yeah, maybe in 20 years, maybe next week, maybe in next hour, maybe next month. We certainly seem close, to me, to some type of catastrophe. That doesn't mean we're necessarily around the corner from World War III. But we could be, and then again, we might not be. In any event, talking about nuclear war as if one were talking about the war in Afghanistan, or the war in Iraq, or the war in Ukraine, or any other war that we've been through, even World War II, which at the end involved the US use of nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. And that was pretty bad. I've seen pictures of some of these survivors. They had burns all over their faces. It was not a pleasant sight to see, but I forced myself to look at it because I felt that I had a duty to look at it. How could I not look at it? How could I remain unaware, like that turtle in a shell? I couldn't be. So I forced myself to look at those images, however horrific. And I realized back then, this is back, maybe I was in third grade, that this might be the end. Well, it turns out that that was not the case. It turns out that there is no more Soviet Union. It turns out that there was, at least for a brief period, peace between the Soviet Union under Gorbachev and the United States, but there are no guarantees that that will continue. No guarantees at all. And so I think that we need to reflect on this and realize that the primary place where these dangers exist is in the first world. I mean, Africa isn't being targeted directly, as far as I know. South America isn't being targeted directly, as far as I know. Neither is the Caribbean or much of Asia. It is primarily the countries of the first world, the countries which are most capitalistic, which face the greatest amounts of threat from any kinds of nuclear holocaust. So, again, the purpose of this video was to point out that this kind of article should be taken very, very seriously by all of us. Again, does not mean that there's going to be a nuclear war tomorrow. Doesn't mean that at all. But unless we are aware of the power of nuclear weapons and what they can do, and the fact that many nations, such as Israel, seem inclined to want to use them now, means that we need to be really, really reflective on this subject, and to realize that when we talk about a nuclear war, we are talking about something that we have never experienced as humanity. It would be a brand new thing. And it is not something to simply shrug one's shoulders at. Not at all. It should be taken very, very seriously by all of us. The fact that Russia is now threatening to do some type of reprisal if the US puts nuclear weapons in Britain. And again, given the history of nuclear weapons, why would the US make that kind of threat? I mean, is Joe Biden some kind of an idiot? Never mind, don't answer that question. I know the answer to it. Poor Uncle Joe. His mind is not what it used to be. Maybe it never was. But regardless, the decisions which are now being made by political officials may have devastating consequences for the world as we now know it. For now, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.